In the days of the judges, there was famine in the land. Now, the days of the judges were wild times to be alive. They were days of uncertainty, of fighting, of violence, as the last verse in the book of Judges says. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Because although the surrounding nations had kings to rule over them, God had not established a king in Israel because God was to be the king of the Israelites. He was to lead them. And in those days, there was a man whose name reflected this, and his name was Elimelech, which means my God is king. And the book of Ruth tells part of his story. And I'm going to be reading quite a bit of it, so I'd invite you to get your Bibles open to the first section of the Old Testament where this lives. Nestled between Judges and Samuel. And we're going to start at the very beginning in Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi, and their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah, and when they reached Moab, they settled there. So in a time of famine in the promised land, the land of milk and honey, Elimelech takes his family from their home in Bethlehem to the fertile land of Moab. Now, what do we know at this point in history about the relationship between the Israelites and the Moabites? Well, during the Exodus, as they passed by, the king of Moab had ordered the prophet Balaam to curse the people of Israel. God intervened to stop this. That's the story with the donkey that talks. But you get that it's not a very friendly relationship. That story is found in Numbers 22. And then in Numbers 25, we're told that Moabite women seduced some of the Israelite men and invited them to worship Moabite gods. And because this happened, many, many people died. So Moab is not really one of the places you would expect someone whose name is my God is king to take his family. But there is one thing that Moab had going for it during a time of drought. Sitting on a tableland to the east of the Dead Sea, Moab had an abundant water supply. It had rich soil and a semi-tropical climate. So here, Elimelech takes his family away from the promised land to Moab. And we're not told in the book of Ruth how long Elimelech himself spent there or whether or not he continued to follow the ways of his God. But we do know that sometime after they had arrived, as it says in chapter 1, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. Now remember, we've been told the names of these boys. Their names are Mahlon and Chilion. Now, the Old Testament is full of clues and hints about what's going to happen, tucked into seemingly ordinary descriptions. And here, the names of these 2 men give us an ominous warning because their names mean sickly and pining. And in verse 5, it comes true. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion died. And Naomi was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. Naomi is left desolate, without any real hope for a future. She is a Hebrew woman, a widow in a foreign land with no clan, no male relative to protect her, no family to look after her, no way of making money. We don't even know if she would still have a home. The only family she has are these 2 daughters-in-law. The story began as a man and his 2 sons and his wife, and now, in a few verses, this has become the story of a woman and her 2 daughters. The narrative tells us that Naomi hears, somehow, the news has travelled, that Israel is once again prospering. Rain has come back, and the land is giving food. And so she decides to go home, to return to Bethlehem. Now, it should not surprise us that her 2 daughters-in-law insist on coming as well, because they married Naomi's sons. They had become her household. They were her family, more her family than they were now their own part of their own family. In marrying these foreign men, these two Moabite women had taken on a whole new context, part of their husband's home, his community, his tribe, not really part of their own anymore. And Naomi agrees at first, and they travel together to the border. But when they get there, at this exit point from Moab, Naomi tells them to go back. What has she to offer them? What is waiting for her when she gets back to Bethlehem? She cannot know. Rather than take them with her to an uncertain future, she offers them the chance for a familiar life. Go home, she says. Return to the families you were born to. Marry again. Go to safety, not the unknown. But Ruth and Orpah continue to refuse. And Naomi says this in verses 11 to 13 of chapter 1. Why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who would grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if that were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. Now, Old Testament law had made it an obligation for the brother of a deceased man to provide an heir for the widow, to give her children to ensure both her security and also to keep his brother's name alive. The child born from this union would be counted as the son of the woman's first husband and receive his inheritance. But there are no brothers. Naomi has no more sons. She has no security, no safety. She has nothing to offer these two women. And what kind of welcome could she expect getting back to Bethlehem? Everyone would know where she had spent the last 10 years. If they returned with her, would they be welcomed in or shut out of friendship and mistreated as outsiders, as foreigners, as people who were different? An experience that Naomi herself perhaps knew very well from her years in Moab as a foreigner. And she urges them, go back to safety, go back to the familiar. She begs them to go and live the life that they always expected that they were going to live. To go to the future that they could be sure of. Orpah is convinced and leaves. But Ruth stays and utters these very famous words that occasionally, and quite strangely, get worked into wedding vows. In verses 16 to 17. But Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. In saying these words and using a traditional Israelite oath, may the Lord punish me or deal with me if I don't do what I say I'm going to do. That bit usually doesn't end up in wedding vows. In saying this, she is leaving behind the life that she knew. She's leaving her family's religion, which was full of practices not acceptable to followers of God. She states that she wants to have faith in the God of Naomi. She wants to convert to belief in the God of Israel. And doing this, she leaves behind the worship of Baal, who we've already heard about this morning, of Ashtoreth, and worship to the Moabite god Chemosh, who many think may have involved human sacrifice. And Ruth leaves her whole life behind, her whole world behind for the God of Israel and the love of her mother-in-law. These two women set off towards Bethlehem. The trade routes would have taken them around the Dead Sea and through Jericho. It's 115 kilometres on foot. 1,400 metres down from the plateau of Moab to the Dead Sea. And then up 1,200 metres to Bethlehem. It was I don't think it was to the Dead Sea. I think I invented that just then. I don't know why I said the Dead Sea. It's 1,400 metres down, then 1,200 metres back up. It was a famously dangerous journey to make. one that you would normally make in groups, not just two people by yourself. It was physically demanding. But no doubt with God's protection, Ruth and Naomi arrive in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. At the time of the 4 spring feasts to the Lord, the feast of Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and the Feast of Weeks, which we know better by its Greek New Testament name of Pentecost. They would have been there to witness the first stalks of barley being presented to the Lord in thanks for him providing them food. Can you imagine that after a decade of famine? So we think in Australia of harvest time as being at the end of summer or in autumn. We talk about fall, autumn being harvest time. But in ancient times in the Eastern Mediterranean, grain would have been planted at the start of winter to take advantage of the winter rains and then harvested before summer got hot. And a calendar of the planting and harvesting schedule was discovered, written on a limestone tablet in Giza, quite close to Bethlehem. And here is a translation to give you an idea of the kind of agricultural cycle this story is set around. It goes like this. 2 months to pick olives, 2 months to plant grain, 2 months to plant vegetables, a month to hoe up flax, a month to harvest barley, a month to reap and thresh the wheat, 2 months to tend our vines, and a month to gather summer fruit. When God gave agricultural laws to Israel, he made provision for those who were poor, without family support, or those from other lands, those who did not have fields and vines and fig trees. Leviticus 19, verse 9 to 10 says this: "When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigners living among you, for I am the Lord your God." Similarly, in Deuteronomy 24, verse 19 to 20, God commanded, "When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf that you've picked, do not go back and get it. Leave it for the foreigners living among you, the orphans and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow." This care for the vulnerable, those without the protective structure of a family and a clan, was built into the fundamental structure of the economy of the people of God. The law of God made certain that care for those on the edges was a core concern, one more important than maximising productivity. People were more important than profit. And as part of the group entitled to do that gleaning, once they're settled in the area around Bethlehem, Ruth asks for Naomi's permission to do this. And chapter 2 starts with a bit of background information in verses 1 to 3. "Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband Elimelech. One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, 'Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it.' Naomi replied, 'All right, my daughter, go ahead.' So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law Elimelech. As it happens, Ruth finds herself in the fields of one of the people who can provide for her and her mother-in-law, a member of their family. Her hard work does not go unnoticed. Boaz asks his foreman, 'Who is this person?' And when he is told that she's a relative, he goes and encourages her to stay in his fields right through the whole harvest, to drink from his water jars, to work amongst his servants rather than behind them, to not be alone, unseen, and vulnerable. When the noon meal comes, he provides her with food more than she can eat, and when she goes back to glean, he makes sure that she is going to be safe," in verses 15 to 16. When Ruth went back to work again, Boaz ordered his young men, "Let her gather grain right among the sheaves without stopping her, and pull out some heads of barley from the bundles and drop them on purpose for her. Let her pick them up and do not give her a hard time." Through her hard work and the kindness of Boaz and his workers, she gleans that day about 13.5 kilos of barley. Her mother-in-law is amazed at the kindness she's shown. She comes back with this massive amount of grain. When Naomi finds out that the man who owns the field is Boaz, she cries out for God to bless him. And she tells Ruth what we as the reader have already been told, that Boaz is a close relative of Elimelech, that he is a kinsman redeemer. And this fact is the hinge that the rest of the story swings on. God had stipulated that his people would not be like other nations. Land could not be bought or sold the same ways as the countries around them were allowed to. No real estate empires or accumulation of land was to happen, because in the end, the land belonged to God. Every 50 years, all land that had been sold to someone else to use was to return to traditional, ancestral, and equitable ownership if it had not already been redeemed. Because to sell the land was to sell the right to use the land up until the next year of Jubilee. Perhaps the land had been sold by Elimelech right before he left for Moab, perhaps much earlier, leaving his family even more vulnerable to the famine that came through. In any case, this land was now in the hands of someone else until the Jubilee. Recognizing that Boaz is a close relative, Naomi makes a plan to ensure both her own ongoing welfare, but also guaranteeing a secure future for this daughter-in-law that she loves, Ruth. In chapter 3, verse 1 to 6, and then 8 to 9, she instructs her to do this. One day, Naomi said to Ruth, "My daughter, it's time I found a permanent home for you, so that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours, and he's been very kind by letting you gather grain with his young women. Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Now do as I tell you. Take a bath, put on perfume, and dress in your nicest clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let Boaz see you until he's finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down, and then go uncover his feet and lie down there, and he will tell you what to do." "I will do everything you say," Ruth replied. So she went down to the threshing floor that night and followed the instructions of her mother-in-law. And now at verse 8 and 9. Around midnight, Boaz suddenly woke up and turned over, and he was surprised to find a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she replied. "Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer. You are my kinsman redeemer, or as your Bible might have it, you are my family guardian." Laying at his feet in the middle of the night, Ruth asks Boaz to come to her aid and the aid of her mother-in-law by redeeming their land. Her request that Boaz spread his garment over her is understood by rabbinic commentators to be a proposal of marriage. But it's also a poetic connection back to an earlier chapter. The word here for garment literally means, as Neil already alluded to, the wings of his garment. Ruth asks Boaz to spread his wings over her and give her protection. Now, it's not many verses since he said something very similar to her. In chapter 2, verse 12, Boaz said this to Ruth, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." She was asking a lot, a mega amount. Not only for this man to buy back her family land, but to marry her and provide her a child who would not be counted as his, but instead the son of his dead cousin, Mahlon, a son who would inherit the land she was asking Boaz to buy back for her. Boaz praises Ruth's kindness and her family loyalty, and he promises to do the right thing, if he can. Boaz, as we have seen through his treatment of Ruth as a gleaner, takes the laws of God very seriously. He recognizes, though, that while she has asked him to be the redeemer, there is another relative with a closer claim. One who might buy the land back for his own use. One who might not take the duty of providing for Naomi and Ruth as seriously as he should. He sends her home, this time with about 30 kilos of threshed grain, probably as much as she could physically carry home, and a promise to settle the matter that day. He gets up and he goes at first light to the gates of Bethlehem, where he sits and gathers 10 elders and this closer relative. And when they're all there, he is ready to begin. Now, the gate of Bethlehem was probably the only opening in the town wall. It was the usual place to conduct legal transactions. It was out in the open, in full view of passers-by. It wasn't a sneaky deal in a back room. It's not behind closed doors. It's where everyone walking in and out to fill their water jars or check on their own harvests would have seen this gathering. They'd count the people. They knew something was up. There's 10 of them there. Something must be happening. And chapter 4, verse 2-4 shows us that Boaz offers the land first to his cousin. Boaz called 10 leaders from the town and asked them to sit as witnesses. And he said to the family redeemer, "You know Naomi, who came back from Moab. She is selling the land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should speak to you about it, so that you can redeem it if you wish. If you want the land, then buy it here in the presence of these witnesses. But if you don't want it, then let me know right away, because I am the next in line to redeem it after you." And the man replied, "All right, I'll redeem it." So this sale of the land, or the right to redeem the land to a closer relative, would allow them to use it, as we've said, until Jubilee. Until Jubilee sent it back to the original owners, and in this case that should have been to Ruth's now dead husband. But with no male children to inherit the land, this close relative was not only in line to have the use of the land until Jubilee, but to keep it and add it to his own inheritance to pass on to his own children. Paying Naomi for the right to use it from now until the Jubilee would give Naomi and Ruth something to live on, but not long-term security, not without a son to inherit and to restore a household and a family to them. This close relative is quite happy to redeem the land. He can expand his own farm, he can increase his wealth and production and pass this on to his children. But then Boaz drops the other shoe. And he mentions the extra obligations that come with this transaction in verses 5-6 of chapter 4. Then Boaz told him, "Of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite widow. That way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family." "Then I can't redeem it," the family redeemer replied, "because that might endanger my own estate. You redeem the land. I cannot do it." This is a different thing. To gain the use of valuable land his own son would then inherit was a good thing. But to have to hand over what he had paid for to a son that would not be his, and to invite an outsider, a foreign wife, into his family, that was too much to ask. Boaz has waited until now to step in, and he does both what the law demands, but also what he had given his word to do. He steps in to do what has no obvious benefit to himself, and all the benefit to these two women, in verses 9-10. Then Boaz said to the elders and the crowd standing around, "You are witnesses that today I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. And with the land, I have acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and to inherit the family property here in his hometown. You are all witnesses today." And in doing this, Ruth and Boaz, as we go on to find out, become the great-grandparents of the King David of Israel, and they enter the line of the Messiah. Ruth gave birth to a son who was called the son of Naomi. A son who brought back to life the dead and buried hopes for a future they thought was not going to happen. The son was named Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. By leaving behind her old life, the one that she was born to, the future that she expected, the life that seemed like it was supposed to be hers, she gained an entirely new future. A future that led not only to her own security and hopes, but a future that gave us all our hope. A future that led to Jesus. A future infinitely bigger than any she could have dreamed for herself. Now this story, the story of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, is one of the best known in the Old Testament. It's short, it's only about 4 pages in most Bibles. But it is a story absolutely packed full of love and loyalty and sacrifice and redemption. And it parallels the Christian experience so strongly. Because like Ruth, so many of us have felt like outsiders. We have all done things we are not proud of. We have all lived lives that have not been perfect. We have all had our hopes dashed, have had promises broken. We all know the pain of sin done to us and by us. But like Ruth, we are invited into the people of God, into the family of God. Like Ruth, it does not matter where we are born, who we have been. All that matters is through faith in God, we step inside his promises and into the future that he gives to us. But Ruth also calls us to be agents of welcoming in. Like Naomi, we can live generously and with love and the best interests of others at heart. Naomi's actions began as focused on her own future. She was going home to Bethlehem. But then on providing a future for this daughter-in-law that she loved. And we, as members of the family of God, are called to extend God's love and care and friendship to those who join our community. Like the kindness Boaz showed to Ruth in giving her protection, in feeding her, in giving her access to water, God offers us protection. He offers to spread his wings over us, to keep us safe. He gives us water to drink, and he is the bread of life. Like Ruth, we all have a guardian, a redeemer, a kinsman redeemer, for the New Testament calls Christ our brother. Christ offers to buy back our future, and in fact, he already has. Through his death and his resurrection, we are all offered eternal life, a future bigger and better than we could ever dream of. And he calls all of us to turn to him, to follow his ways, to walk in his path, to listen to his voice and find our true home in him. Let's pray together. O God, our Father, thank you for your love, your guidance, and your comfort. We thank you for your promise of an eternal future with you and all who are part of the family of God. We praise you for the gift of your Spirit which leads us on the path you have for us. As we walk our life's journey, help us to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and our hands extended to help those around us. Give us wisdom. Give us